Hello and welcome to another modern video series here on modernnexus.com. My name is Ryland, also known as Holy Shamgar on Twitch, and today we're playing Colin's Mullins winning list from SCG Open in Cincinnati. He did go 17-0 with this particular list. We have not changed a card in preparation, so this list is a 5-color list of humans, notably including Freebooter, the new sort of Tide Hollow Sculler analog from Ixalan. It is different in a couple ways, which we'll go over in a second. But that's probably the most notable new inclusion. Other than that, most of these humans have been around. Reflector Mage also, and Thalia, I guess, being, and Thalia's Lieutenant, I suppose, being the newest inclusions after that, but they're nothing new or exciting. The other exciting sort of innovation would be this style of mana base, particularly supported by unclaimed territory. You won't see any kind of mana confluence or city brass or reflecting pools to support our mana base. We've got the 12-color rainbow lands, with both Cavern and unclaimed territory being the best. Ancient Ziggurat being a little bit worse at doing what we wanted to do, considering it does not cast Aether Vial. But you'll notice, other than the 4 Aether Vials and the 20 lands, we've got a cast of only creatures here to help support those Ziggurats, and also, of course, the Vials, and naturally our beatdown plan. We've got Noble Hierarchs to also ramp us a little bit, of course, a human itself, champion for the beatdowns, and then we've got a lot of taxing elements, which are a really important part of the deck. So I already mentioned the freebooters, but we've got Thalia, put the freebooter down there with Thalia as well, and Meddling Mage, as well as Thalia 3 and Reflector Mage to some extent. And that's not a lot of taxing tools. It's not all mana taxing either. Just the Thalia is, but Meddling Mage is particularly powerful and potent against a lot of the combo decks in this format, especially things like Storm. In fact, Storm struggling to beat Meddling Mage on turn 2, game 1. Storm lists may adapt pretty quickly here, but as of now, most Storm lists literally can't beat Meddling Mage at any point of the game in game 1, naming Grape Shot. There's just nothing for them to do. They have no way to remove it. They have no other way to kill you. Again, I anticipate Storm lists will adapt as this deck kind of breaks into the format, but Thalia is fine in matchups like that as well. Obviously, one Baral or Goblin Electromancer effectively counters your Thalia, but it still does good work there. Freebooter, obviously excellent, getting to look at your opponent's hand. Now, I did mention that this is a sort of Tide Hollow Sculler analog. It's certainly better for us, easier to cast in a certain sense, although all of our lands produce white, so it's not really easier to cast, but it flies, which is great. Having evasion is important, and obviously, most importantly, it's a human. The ability itself is slightly worse than Tide Hollow Sculler. Like many other cards with similar abilities, Wizards has moved towards a kind of more streamlined text for these kinds of cards, where instead of being 2 separate abilities like Tide Hollow Sculler, it's just 1 ability. So if your freebooter gets killed in response, you will get to look at their hand, but you won't get to take anything for any length of time, really. Whereas with Tide Hollow Sculler, if your Tide Hollow Sculler gets killed in response, you just permanently exile a card from their hand, because it's worded as two separate abilities. Same kind of distinction between something like Fiend Hunter with 2 separate abilities and Banisher Priest. Fiend Hunter being killed in response, of course, has the creature being permanently exiled, whereas Banisher Priest does not. Thalia, as I said, slowing our opponent down, maybe making them play their lands in a slightly strange sequence. Reflector Mage doing its usual irritating job of bouncing creatures. And then the rest of what we got is just kind of our beatdown plan. We've got our Lords in Mayor of Everbrook and Thalia's Lieutenant. I already mentioned Champion, and then of course Mantis Rider as just another evasive, hasty threat that's also a fine blocker. Before we move on to the sideboard, I haven't mentioned the Horizon Canopies. They're obviously pretty great in this deck as well. You can't play a whole bunch of them in this deck. There's just not a lot of room. Obviously, the mana base is already really tight just because it's filled up with these 12 rainbow lands. but they are good if you flood a little bit to try and draw to some more action. And then I really do, since this is a really common question, want to answer the question up front of why doesn't this deck play Collected Company? And there's a few reasons, right? The thing that sticks out to me the most with this particular list is we're playing Ancient Ziggurat, and Ancient Ziggurat is not very friendly with non-creature spells. It doesn't make mana for anything other than creatures. So if you draw 1, 2 of these in a particular draw and you're trying to cast Collected Company, you're not going to have a good time. So that can be a huge struggle. So then you could say, well, maybe we want to build our mana base differently. Maybe we don't need to be 5 color. Well, white's obviously our base color. That needs to stay. I think black is a necessity because Freebooter is just so good. I think blue is a necessity because Meddling Mage is so good. And I don't think you can cut green. Noble Hierarch is essential to the deck as well. So at that point, you're saying, well, maybe we can cut red for Mantis Riders, but you're still a 4-color deck. You probably still want something like Ziggurat. Maybe you take a more painful mana base and you play Mana Confluence in this slot instead. Those are options. And then the other larger argument is kind of Vial versus Company. You could play them both. Should you play them both? And do we really need Company is the other big portion of that. Do we need that card advantage, or are we more interested in just ensuring that we're the beatdown deck that's lower to the ground? And I think honestly we are just trying to stay lower to the ground. We do have a pretty aggressive curve, a lot more 2s than 3s, at least in pre-sideboarded games. And we're really looking to kind of tax our opponent in just the right ways. I should say disrupt them in just the right ways, and then beat down as quickly as possible. So that said, I think Company's not really right for this particular list. Maybe there's a list of humans that does want Company. You probably wouldn't be able to play this many colors. Maybe you just play Abzan, but I think losing Meddling Mage is too big of a deal. If I was dead set on playing Company, I think I would instead modify my mana base to not include Ziggurats and take a little more damage from something like Mana Confluence, although that has its dangers as well, obviously. So in the sideboard, we got a few different human options here, all creatures once again. Staticaster for any problematic X1s. We've got Vithian Renegades for problematic artifacts. Tireless Tracker for those matchups where we want to grind. There's some discussion about whether or not these should be Dark Confidants. Mirran Crusader, just for when you need a bigger guy. Pro Black, obviously particularly useful against Shadow decks. Fiend Hunter for our sort of removal. Canonist against Storm and some other combo decks. The 4th Reflector Mage for when that's useful against larger creature decks. And then lastly, Sathra Necromancer against Wrath effects. Gives us a bunch of zombies. This card, not great when our opponent is on anger, but if they're on any kind of verdicts or anything like that, can be quite powerful. Or explosives, I guess I should mention as well. So that's what we're working with today. We'll go ahead and hop into those games and see how it goes. See you in a second.